Hello guys, it's Ryan Ho back with another video. Today I want to talk about why the Moondrop Variations is one of the best live music IEMs I've ever heard. Now this IEM is also kind of the best IEM I've ever heard, so we'll talk about why it sounds so good and the technology behind the drivers, as well as we're going to compare this to the Moondrop Blessing 2 so you guys can get a sense of is it worth upgrading from a $320 IEM to a $520 IEM, and what is the differences? The first thing I'll talk about this IEM that makes it really special and unique is this is what people call a tribrid, which basically means it uses 3 different type of drivers inside of it to optimize for every single frequency. So for the bass, you have a dynamic driver. It's really well known to play good thumpy bass. And then for the mid-range, you get 2 BA drivers to play the mid-range, and they're able to kind of produce that really well, and they focus on playing the mid-range. And then in addition, that's special about this one is you get 2 EST drivers, which are electrostatic drivers that play the treble. Now this is the type of driver that the cheaper Moondrop Blessing 2 does not have. And because they're electrostatic drivers and they're specialized to play treble, it really does see a big improvement over the Moondrop Blessing 2. In my opinion, the treble sounds very, very detailed, very good. And that's kind of the big advantage you get for going for a more expensive IEM like this. Anyways, as always, please like and subscribe down below. Helps my videos out. Once again, I want to thank Apos Audio for sending these out for review. They make this video possible to allow me to do these comparisons for you guys. So if you guys are interested in buying anything, I'll have links to Apos down below if you guys are interested. All right, so we have the waifu in front. And then on the back, we have the frequency response of the variations. But let's get inside and see what we got. Interesting packaging. It's like this weird, I don't know, it reminds me of like jewelry or something. Really, it's interesting. And then you kind of open that. What do we have? Some booklet stuff. We have the variations right here. Here we have the nozzles. So essentially you have replacement nozzles and then a clip device that you can use to replace it. Then we have, I assume, the carrying case, and then the cable would probably be inside. Ah, fancy. And then we got this cable. This cable looks like the same exact cable as you get in the Blessing 2. It looks very similar, or at least similar color, but it actually feels a little thicker. So that's nice to see. Ooh, and then we got multiple heads in here as well. Yeah, so it's a multi kind of head system, so you can pull it out and then change the head. So we got the classic 3.5 millimeter on here as default. We can take that off. A Pentacon cable. Oh, and then the very bottom we have the ear tips. It's quite a lot of them. They look like, so we got a combination of foam and then the normal plastic ones. And yeah, so I'm gonna put this together and see how it fits and see how it sounds. So let's take a closer look at the variation. So as you can see, it has a really nice shell, a nice textured design that's pretty cool. It's made of kind of metal, I guess. It feels very sturdy. It's not like the kind of acrylic you get on the Blessing 2, which, I feel like this one will definitely not last as long as this. This is a more industrial type of look. I do think I like the Blessing 2 a little bit more. I think it just looks cooler in my opinion, but I mean, it's up to personal preference, I think. The cable on this comes with a nice cable that kind of hooks around your ear so it doesn't move around. It maintains a shape. And then this kind of copper cable goes down into this nice braid, and then it terminates into multiple heads, so you're able to actually swap these heads. So the first cable I've had that had a swappable cable, so more expensive product have better features like this. So the tips is something I also noticed about this device that's definitely more special and unique. So these tips are customized and they're bigger than the standard tip, so it makes it a lot easier to put them on. So for reference, this is the tip that comes with the Blessing 2. They look similar, but trust me, they're different. The new ones on the variations are much better and much easier to put on. So here you can see the difference in the kind of width, right? The backing on the variation is much bigger, so it's much easier just to put on. So it's nice that they made like a custom improvement to the kind of tips that they provide on the variations. Overall, when it comes to kind of the shape of this, as you can see, the Moondrop Blessing 2 was actually clear, which I do find the clear really cool, honestly. I actually like that look maybe better than the variations in my opinion. But then when you kind of look at the sizing of this, The variation is ever so slightly smaller, so it's more comfortable to fit in your ear on the kind of the stem. And then actually the actual shape too is a little bit more contoured, and it actually kind of sticks out a little bit more on the variation. So in general, I find the variation to be a little bit more comfortable than the Blessing 2. So I think they definitely optimize the shape a little bit better. All right, so let's talk about sound, right? So for the variations, in my opinion, the variation sounds, like I said, a bass boost and neutral. So the bass on this thing is probably the primary trait about this that makes this sound so good, in my opinion. This thing has quite a bit of a nice sub bass boost, and even the mid bass is really kind of emphasized. You'll definitely get enough bass on this IEM. This is definitely not boring at all. The people who like the neutral type of stuff will probably think this one is way too bassy, but in my opinion, the bass on this is one, the sub bass quality is very, very, very clear, and it sounds like a subwoofer, so that sounds really good. Like I said, I was listening to Coachella tracks on at home, and then I was actually at Coachella, so I basically listened to the same stuff I listened to live and then compare that to the tracks I listened to at home. And this did a really good job at reproducing the kind of the sound that I kind of heard in person. Now, obviously, if one thing is when you're in person, you're listening to these ginormous speakers that are able to reproduce the bass and shake your body. Obviously, this is a little IEM in your ear, so it's not going to give you that experience. But the actual bass and the actual physicality, so like how much you can actually feel it, is actually pretty good for an IEM. So honestly, the ability to produce a lot of bass and clean, detailed bass, this does it really well, better than anything I have heard. And honestly, stuff like the Moondrop Aria and stuff like that just really don't compare to this at all. Their type of detail just doesn't compare. The variation is literally in a different league of its own when it comes to just bass quality, in my opinion. Now, let's talk about the mid-range. The mid-range on this is also really good. You know, it's way better than the Blessing 2 as well. You know, you're gonna find me basically say it's a lot better than the Blessing 2 in a lot of ways. Essentially, like the bass as well, the Blessing 2 is flat bass. It doesn't play sub bass particularly well in comparison to the variation. The variation has more quantity and more quality down there, so it's just much better. But anyways, going back to the mid-range, the variation mid-range sounds more forward, more detailed than even the Blessing 2 as well. The mid-range on the variations is really good. It doesn't seem to be pushed back. It seems to be kind of level with everything else. And it honestly feels like the main focus of this as well. And, you know, I find that male vocalists are represented very well. They're a little extra thick because you have the extra low end bass, but really, I think they sound very natural and very pleasant to listen to. Now, the treble of this is the part that's the most unique, right? Because like I said, this has the EST drivers or the electrostatic drivers in this, which are known to be able to play, you know, treble very well. And the best thing about this is, like, you know, I've heard electrostatic headphones and they generally sound very kind of piercing, very exaggerated. But, you know, on this device, the EST drivers don't sound overemphasized. They sound very, very neutral to me. Honestly, I could almost handle more treble than this one has at its stock tips. And I find that the treble is very well controlled compared to the Blessing 2 as well. So the Blessing 2, in my opinion, has a little bit too much lower treble. The treble on this thing is emphasized a little bit, and it gives that really sharp, like, and like the S's and the T's are just very sharp. And it's not really my favorite type of sound. It's not crazy, but you can definitely detect it on the S's for sure that it's overemphasized. And you never get to that point in the variations, in my opinion. It's very well controlled, very good, very natural sounding. Versus for the Blessing 2, in my opinion, I had to swap the tips for this one to make it sound more natural to the spring tips that they have. So yeah, these spring tips make the Blessing 2 sound a lot more natural, in my opinion. And it's definitely something I recommend if you want to listen to music. So when we talk about detail, I do think the variation is more detailed across the board than the Blessing 2. In my opinion, the variation is definitely a big step up from the Blessing 2. And like I said, it's basically the most detailed IEM I have heard. Now let's talk about soundstage and imaging. So for soundstage, the variations, I wouldn't say it's like wide. It sounds very intimate, but it surrounds you more. It sounds a lot taller than in comparison to the Blessing 2. The Blessing 2 sounds more, I guess, lack of a better explanation, more like a tunnel or like a tube-like. So for me, the Blessing 2 kind of sounds like a tube So it sounds like the sounds are kind of coming from like the side and a little bit further away, kind of like a tube, versus I feel like the variations to me in my ear, it sounds like more like around you, but a little bit closer to you, if that makes sense. Like it sounds taller, but closer to you. And overall, I do enjoy the kind of soundstage of the variations more. I just feel like I'm more in the center of the music and everything seems closer and more around me. So that's the thing I like about the variations. Now, I wouldn't say the separation of the variations is particularly special. Like I definitely noticed that, you know, if there's a lot of sounds like playing, it's kind of hard to distinct them because I mean, they're IEMs. You're not going to have really wide sound stage compared to like over your headphones. So that definitely does happen sometimes. When it comes to imaging for the variations, I think it's much better than the Blessing 2. When I hear things on the Blessing 2, they kind of sound like they're off-centered a little bit. Instead of being in the center, they're more like over here. And then I kind of have to like extrapolate the distance right here versus for the variations, you know, when I hear something in the center, it actually is in the center. So for all my testings, I basically just play Valorant, I play Deathmatch, or I play games with it. And when I hear a guy walking around the corner, I can hear him walking, and then he appears in front of me. And that's when I kind of detect him and shoot. That's when, you know, I found the variations to be just way better and exactly where I hear the guy to be and where I imagine to be, and that's where he actually is. So the variations to me definitely has the better kind of imaging for sure, and it's probably one of the best imagings that I've heard. And lastly, to summarize, you know, why I think this is the best, you know, live music IEM is because it's just a very fun sounding IEM. This isn't that neutral, boring type of stuff that a lot of audiophile companies make. This is the fun, bassy, like engaging type of sound that you're inside the music type of IEM. And you, like I said, the sound stage and imaging, you feel like you're wrapped up in it. You also can tell, you know, the directionality of stuff really accurately. Like this to me is one of the best things that kind of recreate kind of the event as if you were there, because all those aspects are really well. On top of that, the kind of, you know, the detail that it's able to reproduce is much higher quality than anything I've heard in the IEM space. So really, that's why I think this is the best kind of live music IEM that I've heard. And of course, so the question is upgrading from the Blessing to the variations worth it? In my opinion, it definitely is. I mean, I already know that there's a Blessing 3 out now, so, you know, I don't have the Blessing 3 to review because I don't have enough subscribers, so they send me old stuff. So, you know, if you guys want to subscribe down below, maybe I'll get newer stuff for you guys to review. But you can definitely see the age of the Blessing 2 in comparison to the variations. And that's what the variation really feels like to me, is all around a lot of improvements that they learned from the Blessing 2. So do I recommend the Moondrop variations? I definitely do. I feel like this has a very fun sound. That's a nice bass boost, neutral type of sound, versus the kind of the Moondrop Blessing is very neutral, bright type of sound. I'm definitely more of this type of guy. This to me sounds the most natural sounding. Like I said, when I go to a concert, this is the type of sound that I want to be hearing, because, you know, I feel like the bass boost is necessary to sound more natural, just to get that thump, because with flat bass, you really don't get that sound, that lively sound, versus this really does that really well. And the treble on this, like I said, is very well controlled, and the mid-range comes out very wonderful, very forward, very present, and it all around sounds the most natural I've heard so far. And that's why I really, really like this IEM. I'm definitely gonna recommend the variations. And yeah, anyways, please like and subscribe down below. Helps my videos out. I make, you know, more audio and tech review type of stuff here all the time, so you don't want to miss out on that. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.